Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. Welcome back to another edition of Impactful Teamwork. My name's Julia Felton and I am your host and guide for the next 20-30 minutes as we delve into everything about teamwork. And on today's episode, I really wanted to delve into the concept of natural leadership and talk a bit about the difference between conventional leadership and nature-inspired leadership, because I think this is a really important topic for us to understand. And I know you might be wondering why I reference nature all the time. And as you'll be aware, I think that the answer to a lot of things lies in nature. So I just think it's interesting for us to delve into this whole topic and see what is out there, what some of the conventional thinking is about leadership, and how the model that exists in nature is very different. And as you will know, I'm passionate about the way that we currently run and lead businesses is no longer fit for purpose for the 21st century. And I think the solution lies in nature. And what's interesting in having done some research on this over the years is I was talking about the opportunities to learn from nature nearly a decade ago. And at that time, it was pretty cutting edge. And nowadays, more people are understanding that there are new models and new ways to run business that exist, and that nature has this blueprint. And I actually stumbled across some research, actually, even back as far as 2011, 2010, when other people were also recognizing this. And it's just really incredible to me how long it's taken for there to be some recognition and acceptance that the current ways we're doing things don't work and we need to do something different. And maybe nature has the solution. So I'm going to reference a piece of research that I found from Nigel McFetterish and Polly Williamson from February 2011. And I'll put some information in the show notes about it if you want to go and have a look at it. But I think for many of us, our traditional concept of a conventional leader, and this still exists in many organizations, is the strong lone hero with devoted followers that wait to be told what to do next. And the leader's the only one with the answers, the only one who knows the way. They're the keeper of the knowledge and the plans, and the one who made the important decisions for what happened in the business. And business is shaped by conventional thinking, is based on leaders sitting in their kind of ivory towers with their drop-down organizational structures, where the leader's controlling this flow of knowledge and information and resources to those below. And these conventional leadership models do have the benefits and their place. However, they're just not fit for purpose for this 21st century, where firms need to be agile and adaptive, fluid and flexible, responsive and resilient. We need to find ways to leverage the full capacity and diversity of our workforces and extend the value of the network through these rapid and unpredictable times of change. And I just think it is so interesting that when we look at the world today, this old model of leadership just isn't viable. I think we all know that. We live in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous world, where everything is changing. The speed of technology is exponentially ramping up day in, day out. Technology that wasn't here a year ago is now mainstream and being used by everyone. I think about something like ChatGPT. I think I first heard about it in the middle of last year, and now it's something I use on a day-to-day basis. So life is shifting so fast for everybody. And the thought that one leader can know everything just no longer stands true. Maybe in the old days, before the days of the internet, where you were the factory boss, and you have people working on the production line, then maybe you could know everything because our world was so small. But the advent of the internet, social media means there's so much information out there that nobody can know everything. And this is why these conventional structures of leadership are just falling down and are no longer fit for purpose. And so natural leadership or nature-inspired leadership looks to nature for models, strategies, and solutions for problems that are similar to the ones that they're experiencing. And it draws on the myriad leadership models in nature that they've been redefined over 3.8 billion years. So nature has evolved and adapted and continually changed context. And that's why there's so much that we can learn from nature. Because firms of the future are going to have to thrive with limited resources and sudden big shocks. And that's what happens in nature too. Nature often has some limited resources and big shocks in terms of temperature change, for example, or ecology changes that shift everything. So I think there's some really good reasons why we can look to nature for some solutions. And what are some of the changes that are happening that are fueling this? Well, they're going to be things like climate change, limitation of water, limitation of raw materials, growth of the world's population, globalization of business, digitalization of information, shifting markets. The change in the economy is limitless. And this globalized business as well has, of course, helped us appreciate and recognize the need for this interconnectedness that goes on that nature always understands. And the fact that small changes in one area have this massive ripple effect that can impact everything else. And I think nature really understands the impact of this ripple effect, but a lot of businesses don't. And this is why we still struggle with this silo mentality in the workplace, where one team just doesn't really recognize that by changing something, the follow-on effect that that's going to have for the rest of the organization could be significant. And this is why so many change initiatives really struggle to work, because often we're looking at change within one division or one area, and we really fail to take into account the magnitude of the change and how it impacts everything else. So these leadership models of the future need to be flexible and fluid, agile and adaptable, responsive and resilient. Business needs to put people first with values at the core and adopt a transformative leadership style that's well placed to become a business inspired by nature. And as we move forward, I'm seeing future leaders needing to nurture leadership at all levels of the organization, distributed across multiple organizations and directed not just downwards, but in all directions. Because the style of leadership and the intensity of leadership needs to be really, really dynamic. And this really requires a massive change and transformation in people's thinking. Because when we're leading the emergence of new sustainable business and transitioning away from conventional unlimited growth-based businesses, in this unpredictable environment, we're going to require mutual engagement with new values-based cultures and a strong sense of purpose. So that requires a new level of thinking about the role of leadership and the interplay and the relationships between systems and people. Because success in the future is unlikely to be judged by simple measures of processes and outputs, but maybe more by the stories and narratives of all the parties involved. So to be successful, we need to build on traditional thinking about leadership and assess which elements remain fit for purpose in the new context, and be open then to new leadership models and approaches to transform our thinking and our behavior. When we think about how to transition from conventional to natural leadership, businesses and organizations can be viewed as operating in a dynamic framework of 5 components. So you might just want to draw this. You could just draw this as 5 points around a circle. And the 5 components are reality check, real goals, people, and action. And this is a framework that I would like to share with you so that we can compare what nature-inspired leadership looks like compared to conventional leadership. So let's look at that first pillar, reality. So reality represents the environments, the conditions, and the parameters in which the organization operates. And it covers all things external to the organization, including technological development, socioeconomic, political trends, resource availability, and nature. And leaders shaped by conventional thinking are making limited assumptions, and they ignore the complexities and interconnectedness and the changes that are occurring around them. And they often have a complete or inaccurate view of reality, which leaves them vulnerable to disruption and unable to leverage the emerging opportunities. And of course, we've seen this with a number of companies that have not paid attention to what was going on in the environment around them, and then they have become obsolete. And, we always talk about Kodak or Blockbuster videos, for example, all organizations that failed to transform with the times and are now really not around anymore. Whereas leaders inspired by nature are really going to seek to constantly understand, sense, respond, and align with the realities of the human and the natural systems. And natural leaders recognize that systems are complex and can be difficult to understand. But they also recognize that nature has a myriad of successful models for understanding and leveraging this complexity and these dynamic systems in which the business operates. So pillar number 2, reality check. So organisms in nature survive by constantly checking where they are and how they're doing relative to the constant changing reality around them. And based on the reality check, they're always moving towards a positive outcome. And recognizing and aligning with the reality with which and within which you operate is not only needed for survival, it also creates innovative, resilient, dynamic business organizations. So the challenge that we have is that leadership, which is shaped by conventional thinking, often has only one reality check, and that's profit. And everything is measured in terms of money, ignoring the rest. And we've seen this all the time, the short-term thinking, the organizations, particularly driven by short-term reporting to the stock exchange, that just focus on the profit that they're making each and every quarter. But leadership inspired by nature measures what they value, and they're constantly checking how well they're performing in and aligning with the realities in which they operate. And they're also embedding these feedback loops, which are so, so important. Nature is prolific in the amount of feedback loops it has, that's always giving it data so it can adapt and alter course depending on what's happening. So this reality check allows businesses to respond and adapt to the changes and rapidly recover from unpredictable disruption and leveraging emerging opportunities. So number 3, the real goals. Goals are what an organization chooses to be and chooses to do. And real goals reflect a more complete understanding of reality, as well as the unique values of the organization. Real goals address risks and leverage opportunities created by dynamic reality. So leaders shaped by conventional thinking set goals based on incomplete understanding of the reality and what they think they can achieve given the problem and challenges they think they will face. And their main goal, and sometimes the only goal, is to maximize profit, especially in the short term, as we've just said. And their goal setting is closed top-down approach. And that cannot lead to a sustainable, resilient, innovative business. So contrast that with leadership inspired by nature, which sets goals openly and collectively based on a complete understanding of the dynamic reality, what is fit for purpose, and what is really possible. Real goals are based on a pure vision. They're uncontaminated by perceived limitations to what is currently considered possible. The real goals are based on striving to optimize abundance for the business ecosystem, and the shareholders and the community. But leaders inspired by nature don't dwell on analyzing and solving perceived problems and challenges, but rather they focus on knowing what really good looks like and choosing how best to move towards positive outcomes. And pillar number 4, people. We know people are the core of every business. That's why we talk about teamwork being your competitive superpower. And people refers here to everybody, the people in the organization, your team members, your shareholders, your stakeholders, your supply chain, your consumers, and maybe even the communities in which you operate. All of these people impact your business. And leaders with conventional thinking tend to think about filling the organizational chart and squeezing the most out of people and retaining good people through status and pay structures. And people are only the human resources their job descriptions say they are. And mistakes and failures are punished. And a lot of the relationships when we are plagued by conventional leadership thinking are competitive. And we, in this ego space of creating a I win, you lose situation, they're not based on a win-win collaborative version. So people often feel controlled or micromanaged. Again, contrast this with natural leadership, which fosters and leverages this diversity, feedback loops, free energy, redundancy. It fits form to function, self-organizes and optimizes rather than maximizes. So natural leadership creates conditions to optimize the unique capacities of each person, fostering and leveraging diversity. Natural leaders reward innovation. The leadership is fluid and dynamic. And it allows this self-organization that fits form to function. And relationships with all of the people involved with the business, team members, customers, shareholders, stakeholders, and the extended business ecosystem are based on synergies designed for creating abundance and resilience. And this is what I really, really love, is this thought that everything is abundant in nature. And just if we took that one concept back to the workplace, what a difference that could make if we actually operate it from a position of abundance. We have abundant resources. We have an abundance of ideas, an abundance of money, an abundance of people ideas. What a difference that could make to an organization. And it would really stop a lot of the silo mentality that we see going on, because people would realize there was enough of everything to go round. And the 5th pillar is actions. And actions are the realizations of goals. And actions include the business processes and products, as well as interaction with and impact on the human and natural systems. The action of leadership shaped by conventional thinking is power-driven, profit-driven, risk-based, and therefore is limited in its innovation and therefore is probably unsustainable. Contrast that with leaders inspired by nature who recognize that there's a myriad of ways to interact with human and natural systems. And they take action to align and support with these and leverage them. And actions are always forward-looking. They're always moving towards individual and collective outcomes. And the actions are simultaneously self-serving and supportive of the people and systems in which they operate. So let me just share with you now a few examples of how this works in nature, because I think there's a lot of metaphors we can take from nature about how they relate to business. And metaphors used by conventional business leaders tend to be very mechanical. Just think about it. Think about these phrases. The business runs like a well-oiled machine. There's a spanner in the works. Let's get to the nuts and the bolts of the problem. People are just cogs in the wheel. Process re-engineering, human resources, the list goes on. The very language of business reinforces this machine-type metaphor. And I hadn't really thought about it, but when I read this and I saw this, I was like, oh my God, how true is that? How do we think of our businesses as so mechanistic? And yet we know it's people that make all the difference. So as leaders, our words and actions are being really constantly scrutinized and interpreted by the people we work with. So let's change the language we use so that that might even change people's behavior. And if we use kind of nature-associated metaphors, this can help move thinking away from the machine metaphor to a nature-inspired way of thinking. And here's an example. If you want to help a colleague coping with stress related to a major change in your business, how about reframing for your team member what's going on like this? Imagine seaweed. It lives in a rocky place. The tide ebbs and flows daily. The sea water swirls around itself and the surrounding rocks. It is battered by winds and waves, tides and currents. Sometimes it's above water, sometimes below, twice a day. But it survives and thrives. How does it do this? It does this by swirling with the currents, going with the flows, which, metaphorically represents the demands of the organization coming in from all directions, but it's always attached to the rock, which represents your values. I just love this metaphor of how we embrace change, because it's going to happen, and it is. It's a bit like the tide ebbing and flowing around us. And how do we stay solid and certain with all this change going around us and this volatility? Well, it's through being true to our values. And of course, another thing that we can do is that we can actually spend time out in nature, creating experiences for our team members to actually get back into nature, because we know the power of being in nature, how it clears our mind and focuses our senses, and actually helps us tune into the wider environment. And I think when we see ourselves as part of nature rather than disconnected from nature, that's actually quite empowering, because we recognize that we're part of this huge ecosystem of everything around us. And certainly for myself, I don't feel so isolated and alone when I realize I'm actually part of nature. So I just want to talk about a few leadership models that exist in nature, because there are a variety. And when we look to nature for solutions to what's going on in business today, there are a number of different leadership models we can use. And we know that not one leadership model fits all. So I just wanted to share with you 3 different types of leadership models that we're seeing in nature, because some of these might be appropriate to your organization. I think the one thing I would say about all these different types of leadership models, which range from no leader to multiple leaders, is that they all have in common a deep local attunement, perfect synchronicity with the larger environment, and the intention to lead to the most effective collective action. So the leadership style is right in that moment for the collective good of everybody. Again, there's no ego. We go from ego to echo leadership, systems leadership. So one of the first examples I want to share is of the leaf-cutting ants in Texas. And they form amazing social structures of up to 7 million workers per nest, where sophisticated communication systems based on chemicals enable an optimal balance between group behavior versus self-interest and shared goals and values. Nobody is in charge. There is a queen, but despite her lofty title, she wields no authority. Her sole function is to lay eggs, not to give commands. But there's no time or place for ineffective leadership or management structures here. Each ant constantly touches its antenna with other ants to ensure they're all on the same page, working as one. And depending on the challenge or the opportunity, the colony as a whole calculates quickly and precisely, adjusting resources accordingly. So such a great example of you don't have to have a leader in order for everything to work effectively together. Providing there's excellent communication, the ants touching their antennas with each other, and everyone understands the shared purpose of what we're wanting to do. I think one of the challenges is that in the business context, globalization and digitalization have eroded traditional barriers between actions and interactions, between our internal and external environment. And what does this mean? It means the traditional top-down hierarchical leadership cannot be effective if boundaries are blurred or porous. And even bottom-up leadership is too stifled. So firms of the future are going to require network leadership to be truly successful. This is what the ants have, this network leadership. And this is really important in an interconnected age with real awareness, common values, and emergent approaches based on feedback loops. The second example I wanted to remind you about was about the migrating geese, which fly in that V formation. We've talked about them a lot. Because again, there's no single leader. Instead, the geese take turns in leading the formation for legs of the journey before falling back and allowing a new leader to emerge. And it's believed that only a subset of the flock possess knowledge about the migration route. And these members may be the only individually know part of the route, which means the leadership has to rotate dynamically so that the most able member is able to perform the leadership function at the right time. And this is so important, actually, knowing what your most important role is and where you add the most value within your organization, and then stepping into that leadership role when it's that time. And that's exactly what the geese do. And it's kind of believed, I know that we've all heard the geese kind of honk as they're going along, and it's assumed that actually that they do this to encourage the leader to maintain the pace and therefore demonstrate an element of network leadership within the same way that the ants do with their antennae. Contrast this with business, where there are usually organizational barriers between leaders and followers that prevent mobility and cross-fertilization of information. And we've also got business leaders that remain in situ according to fixed contract terms rather than needs-based tenure. So how about an optimal strategy would be to develop multi-directional mobility within a business and allows the leaders to emerge temporarily when they have the unique skills. And when the leadership requirements change, they provide a seamless path from that position into another optimal role for the individual. And this is the whole concept of shared leadership that I talk about with the horses, because within the horse herd, a horse moves into the role that is required. So if they see the danger, their role is to run ahead and take the herd to somewhere that's going to be safe away from the danger. And lastly, I just want to share the example of the wolves, which is slightly more corporate in nature because the wolf packs do operate with an established hierarchy and have defined leadership roles, with the alpha wolf's role to make decisions for the pack. And he maintains his position through performance, not aggression. And he will be replaced if he doesn't live up and do a good job. And the entire pack shared value is group unity and behavior, including the choice of leader. And that's determined optimally to deliver the outcome. And lone wolves who don't share the group's values leave the group. So wolves present a really exciting example of dynamic leadership within the context of shared group values. So what's the learning point for business here is that leadership in any form should be challenged constantly to test that it remains fit for purpose and capable of delivering group rather than individual results. And it's such a great reminder, this, that a leader cannot rely upon status alone and must respect and be respected by members of the group to maximize overall performance. So I hope I've managed to demonstrate here there's so much that we can learn from nature about how to employ natural leadership skills within our organization. And I do think it's so fascinating that when we start looking at the language that we've been using to describe our organizations, how it is very mechanistic. Even the language about our people, a lot of the leadership books out there talk about the war for talent. Everything we're putting into a kind of aggressive stance. And that's so at odds with my thinking that leadership is so much more connective and collaborative. It's all about how do we work together to create a massive contribution. We understand that we're all connected. We move from this ego to echo view of leadership, where collective responsibility, the we rather than the I, is what is at the heart of all of it. And I think personally, if any organization is going to survive going forward, we need to move from our old conventional thoughts of leadership to this new, much more dynamic style of leadership inspired by nature. So my invitation to you this week is I'd love you to have a reflection on what kind of language are you using to describe your business? Are you using nature-based language? Are you using much more mechanistic language? Are you talking about wars of talent rather than the collaborative nature of people working together? Are you focusing on collective responsibility and moving from this ego control system to this much more collaborative contribution that everyone makes? So these are just some of my musings this week. I've really been musing on this. And if any of you would also like to catch a webinar that I'm delivering on this, we'll also put a link in the show notes where you can catch a replay of a webinar that I recently run about natural leadership and what we can learn from the natural world. So have an amazing week, and I shall catch you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?